Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Nice to see everybody at home. Please join in with some comments if that's okay. Welcome. Lovely to see you, Emma.
Lovely to see you, Andy.
As always, bless you. Thank you so much. So tonight, very interesting subject, talking about Easter Saturday, aren't we? Folks at home, if you'd like to answer a question, here's one for you. What situations in the world make you cry out to God? Let me say that again. What situations in the world make you cry out to God? So far we had 3 weeks. This is kind of halfway, I guess. Em, that's so far. We
Just over.
started off with asking the question: if God made the world, why is it so messed up? And we talked about God creating the world with certain laws, which normally He wouldn't actually intervene with. And we had a bit of debate about whether God intervenes today or not, and we had different opinions from ourselves and others. Then we thought about why are people so horrible to each other, and we came with our concept, the HTMU. HTMU, Imogen, what it was?
Human tendency to muck up.
I just make sure I've got the letters the right way around, because sometimes I say it and I get it wrong. So we then talked about that and about we kind of can't help it. It's just what happens. Then last week we talked about, does God care when things actually go wrong? And we talked about the cross and Jesus dying on the cross to deal with HTMU. And we talked about Jesus not having HTMU. So he was okay, he was worthy to actually do that. So that's us up to date, Em. Over to you for number 4.
Yeah. So we're going to be looking at some tough stuff tonight. We're thinking about lament. We're thinking about Holy Saturday, which was the day that in between the cross and the resurrection, when Jesus had died. It's not a cheerful subject, but a really important one. But so we felt it was important to say, if you're really struggling, if something that we say tonight or something that comes into your mind is really hard for you and you don't have anyone to talk to, then you can call the Samaritans for free anytime from any phone on 116 123. If you wanted to talk to a Christian, perhaps a Christian minister, about some of the things that are on your mind, if you email us, lifeandsoul@lrbc.org.uk, we can put you in touch with someone. So if there's really tough stuff that you're dealing with, don't go through it alone.
No, that's good advice. Thanks, Em.
So last week we talked about Jesus' death on the cross, one of the central mysteries of the Christian faith. And Andy reminded us that Christians believe that Jesus didn't stay dead, but rose again on the third day. We call this the resurrection, and we'll be talking about it next week. But what happened in between the cross, which happened on a Friday, and the resurrection, which happened on a Sunday? What happened on that Saturday? Andy, test of your Bible knowledge. What does the Bible tell us about it?
Is that like a trick question? I think
It's
it could
not a
be.
trick question.
No.
Just
I'm not
one.
sure it talks very much about Easter Saturday. It tends to go from Good Friday, loads on Good Friday, straight to Easter Sunday, I think, doesn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah. Only one of the 4 Gospels, so the 4 accounts of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, only one of them tells us anything at all. I think it's Matthew.
Right.
Tells us something very briefly about the guards and what they were up to. But basically, the Bible doesn't really tell us anything at all. All that we know for sure about this day is that on that day, Jesus was dead and in the tomb. And this day is sometimes referred to as Holy Saturday. The men, the disciples who followed Jesus, the male disciples, that is, they'd all run away in fear when Jesus was arrested. They were hiding, afraid of being arrested themselves. It was the Jewish Sabbath, so no one was allowed to do any work on that day. The women hadn't run away. The women who followed Jesus wanted to anoint Jesus's body. This was a Jewish custom, but they had to wait until the Sunday. They had to wait until the Sabbath was over. And so that Saturday was a day of profound stillness. For Jesus's followers, all hope had gone. The wonderful work that Jesus had been doing, the 3 years of healing and teaching people about God, all come to an abrupt end. And in many ways, it'd be true to say it's a really depressing day to think about. But sometimes that's how we feel. We're depressed. We're very sad. We're hopeless, perhaps. And we need a way of meeting God when that's where we are. And I believe God has given us Holy Saturday. I sometimes say that Holy Saturday is a little bit like the time after a funeral when most people move on, but the family and the close friends of the person who've died are left living with their loss.
Yeah, I've experienced that, Em. I don't know if you've had anybody close to you die. Both my mum and dad are both now dead. And when my dad died, goodness me, 30 plus years ago now, it must have been. I noticed after about a week of the funeral, people had forgotten.
Mm.
And of course, I was still very raw, going through the whole year with different anniversaries, birthdays, memories. Our first Christmas, we did something very different. We went for Chinese, I think, on Christmas Eve rather than anything else because of it. But many other folks, bless them, had forgotten.
Yeah.
And that I found particularly difficult. When Mum died, I was more ready for that. I think in some ways that was some years later. And I guess many other folks might have had a similar experience who are going through hell, and no one seems to appreciate it.
Because there's times in our life that are intensely painful, and you might think about acute pain. Really painful doesn't last forever. Acute pain never lasts forever. It always comes to an end. But then there's chronic pain, isn't there? There's pain that goes on and on and on, and that we have to live with. I follow this fantastic community on Twitter called You Belong. It was started by a young woman who's very open about the fact that she has a chronic illness. And she started this online community, I think partly because she couldn't physically attend church. I think before the pandemic, she couldn't physically attend. And obviously people with chronic illnesses, many of them are clinically extremely vulnerable and had to be really careful about exposure to COVID. So people will quite often tweet, about how today they're having a bad day. They don't have the energy to do anything at all. Or consider a mental health diagnosis. I'm very open about the fact that I suffer from anxiety, and I have done since I was about 15 years old. So that's over 25 years now. And anxiety is something that never really goes away. It fades into the background sometimes. At other times it comes out raging. It's something that I have to live with. And medication really helps, and talking therapies really help. And I have a much better quality of life as a result. Or consider a situation where there isn't any hope. Holy Saturday, I think, is a day for when hope is gone, because Jesus' followers at the time, they didn't know Jesus was going to come back from the dead. As far as they were concerned, that was the end of it. I'm not sure if we talked about this on Life and Soul before, but I know you and I, Andy, have talked before on my personal blog about the fact I had to come to terms with permanent infertility. I realised that I would never have a baby, that there wasn't any hope. And people love to tell me their miracle baby stories, but these stories can be so unhelpful, because actually someone struggling with infertility, you have to lose hope, because you have to stop, you have to draw a line, you have to say no more. And it's only when you do that you can grieve and you can move on with your life. So to kind of draw a few threads together, I would say Holy Saturday is not a comfortable place, but it's a necessary place. And for some people, it's a place they live most of the time.
Very difficult. This is tough stuff, Emma, isn't it? There's no getting away from it. I had a phone call from a very good friend of mine this week, and I've got permission to talk about the call because I phoned him back later to chat to make sure that was okay. He's been both a mentor and a role model for me for many years. I've worked with him, and really he helped me start my business and the rest of it. But he's been there and back over the last few months. He's a very practical, down-to-earth sort of chap. He had a heart attack back, I think it was in October, and only just made it in hospital to actually survive. If it hadn't been the right circumstances, he would have made it. One of his daughters has then been diagnosed with severe cancer as well. And his mental health took a turn for the worse, shall we say, and he's been living with serious clinical depression. He said to me, I'm not trying to compare myself with Jesus, but I hit the lowest depths and I was shouting out, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's how seriously he took it. Many folks have been praying for him and for his family all around the world. But he said, I've had some serious questions about God. he said, don't get me wrong, I'm aware that sometimes through difficult circumstances, people can learn and they can grow, and life can actually change and be better because of it. But God, what benefit would there be for my daughter to die, leaving a young family? And that was one of the questions that he actually posed. He actually posed to God.
Mm.
And he was telling me that through these strivings, he was challenged over a number of months by two questions. And he said, actually, from Jesus, actually things that Jesus actually asked in the Gospels. One was, excuse me, I've got myself on, was, who do you say I am? And the second was, do you love me? Both things that Jesus asked his disciples. And over a period of time and some really, really dark days, he came back with answers to both those questions after really seeking, if you like, what's called, I think, maybe dark night of the soul. He went through a long, prolonged Holy Saturday. To ask the question is, who do you say I am? He actually said, you are a good God who loves me, although I do not always get it, which I guess means what he was going through. And you love me? He said, I worked out that I love God, whatever. Now, I find that particularly challenging because I haven't been through those circumstances. I've had my own demons, should we say, and trials, and difficult things have happened, but nothing quite as extreme as where he has actually been there.
Mm. Mm.
As I say, he's somebody I've known for many years, and almost a different person because of it.
Mm. Mm. Thank you, Andy.
Mm.
We've had a comment from Eleanor about situations that make her cry out to God. I read in the paper that the first teenager of 2022 had been killed in a stabbing. We're not even 2 months in. We're slowly coming out of COVID. There's a threat of the invasion in Ukraine. And, you know, things like this are still happening. There's a 5-year-old girl who was killed during a skiing lesson when someone slammed into her. A simple accident that cost the family so much. It's really heartbreaking. Absolutely. You know, just a snapshot of there's so many different painful situations. Some the result of human tendency to muck up. Some just awful chance events. Thanks, Eleanor, for that.
Yeah. Eleanor's come back with, does everything really happen for a reason? We might come back to that, I guess. That's a really great question.
I'm guessing you and I might come up with different answers to that as well.
I think we might do. I've also had, sorry, go on.
Just very quickly, and we might come back to it. Eleanor, I've been reading, I finished reading a book called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I Have Loved, by a woman called Kate Bowler, who is herself struggling with a really challenging cancer diagnosis. Is a Christian and an academic, studies the history of religion. And she studies the prosperity gospel, and she, you know, her coming to terms with her own illness forced her to confront this question: does everything happen for a reason? And it's fascinating, Andy, because she describes, she wrote an article for the New York Times. She's an excellent writer. So she wrote an article about her experience, and she got, you know, hundreds and hundreds of letters in from people, all desperate to try and give a reason why this was happening to her. And her conclusion was that there wasn't a reason. But I mean, excellent question.
Yeah, and I would come back and I would say yes and no to that, because sometimes you can see why things may be happening, but there's a mystery to life, and most of the time you can't see why things, and why is it fair, is it not fair, all of those sort of things. Is there a perfect plan? The rest of it, very difficult to see sometimes. Very difficult to see. I've had some also send. There's a couple of our folks who normally join us who couldn't, but actually sent me a few comments. I'll just read a couple of those out. This is one from Reshma, who's actually with her family from India today, and she said during the tough times she reaches out to God. When, for example, she lost her loved one, particularly her dad, she reached out to God when the things in life don't go well. But also she says it's important to remember God in good times too, such when you get a new job, a car, a house, etc. And does that make sense? She says, and I say absolutely. Yeah, through good, bad, and ugly times, as I like to say, just so I can quote the film, really. There we go. Also, our friend Jill couldn't make tonight. She got a friend, and she sent me a big long article about how God challenged her I think it was March or April 2020, as lockdown was just starting to get really going, and how God challenged her about having some rest and taking on my yoke, which are verses from the book of Matthew, I believe, and how she had worked out. And again, I say this with her permission because I checked that she was using other yokes rather than Jesus. And she talks about things like alcohol, not as an alcohol problem particularly, but her yoke was a pint of beer rather than Jesus. And she had to go through some interesting times to sort us out. And I guess many of us have our own yokes that we go to through in difficult times. Maybe it's a fantasy life or something like that to get away from reality. That's my particular favourite, I think. Imagine things are different. But I'm playing for England at cricket, those sort of things, I imagine. So there we go.
Thanks for that, and thanks to Jill and to Reshma for sending those thoughts
Yeah,
in.
good stuff.
Our spiritual practice for tonight is lament. Lament is crying out to God about pain and suffering and asking God to do something. And there are many, many psalms of lament in the Bible. The Psalms is the book right in the middle of the Bible. If you pick up any Bible and open it in the middle, you'll almost certainly end up in the Psalms. They're very ancient. They were written long before Jesus was born. And scholars believe they were used in worship in ancient Israel. So they kind of, you read them kind of like poetry, but scholars believe they were used, kind of read out in temple worship. And there's actually more psalms of lament than any other kind of psalm. About a third of the psalms are psalms of lament, of people crying out to God. So I'm going to read Psalm 6, which is a good example of a psalm of lament. Lord, don't be angry and rebuke me. Don't punish me in your anger. I'm worn out, O Lord, have pity on me. Give me strength. I'm completely exhausted, and my whole being is deeply troubled. How long, O Lord, will you wait to help me? Come and save me, Lord. In your mercy, rescue me from death. In the world of the dead, you are not remembered. No one can praise you there. I am worn out with grief. Every night my bed is damp from my weeping. My pillow is soaked with tears. I can hardly see. My eyes are so swollen from the weeping caused by my enemies. Keep away from me, you evil people. The Lord hears my weeping. He listens to my cry for help and will answer my prayer. My enemies will know the bitter shame of defeat. In sudden confusion, they will be driven away.
Wow. I guess I'm somebody who's always liked to paint a happy picture of life as a Christian, that follow Jesus and life is better. And I guess the reality is it's not necessarily better, it just means you've got somebody with you in it. And I guess lament is something that I haven't particularly been aware of or interested in until, well, I guess you introduced the subject to me, Emma, if I'm really honest, a couple of years ago when you did a talk about it. And I'm still learning what it actually means to actually lament. I had some thoughts as you read out Psalm 6. In fact, I looked at it earlier rather than thinking, oh, well, they're now basically. But some words really challenged me, I think. First of all, worn out, give me strength, my whole being troubled, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, emotionally, I guess, as well. I was talking about how long as a question. And then at the end, that God actually listens and he actually answers. Now, over the last few months, we've been asking God for some really big things, including healings for people who are seriously ill. And let's be real about this. Some of those people have actually, unfortunately, died, even though the last few days that's happened. Then my friend I talked about earlier, who had a daughter with cancer. The reason he phoned this week was to say that he doesn't know how, and he's very cynical about a lot of these things here. But he's had what he's called a miracle, that actually the cancer appears to have actually gone without an operation. They're taking precaution measures to make sure nothing comes back, so she's going through some procedures still. But I find that quite difficult, quite exciting, and I praise God and thank God for that in the case. But my question is, of course, why does God appear to do things sometimes and not other times? I mean, some would say that God never does anything, and that's obviously a view. But I don't know. I find that difficult. it's sometimes more difficult when God does do something than when he doesn't do something, for me personally. What do you think, Em?
Well, I mean, it's great news, and what, you know,
Mm.
it's wonderful to hear that that family has been spared that agony. Absolutely, but I'm afraid I'm not sure about miracles anymore.
Mm.
Um, I had an experience a few years ago. In fact, I was sitting next to you at the time, Andy, although we didn't talk about it at the time. Andy and I
No.
were at a Christian conference a few years ago, and we went to hear a speaker in the evening in the big tent. There was a couple of thousand people there, I guess, and the speaker was basically talking about prayer and about healing experiences that he'd had in his family and people who'd miraculously been saved. And I was sitting there, and I was processing the fact that, you know, I hadn't had a miracle. I wasn't going to have a baby, and I was just so angry. And I'm not someone who walks out of stuff. I really don't. And I did. I got up and I walked out,
Mm.
and that's the only time I've ever done that. Because it just made me angry for exactly what you just say, Andy. This question, it's all very well for you, mate. I was thinking,
Yeah,
but what about me? You
absolutely.
know, and what
No, I
what
get it.
about the many thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people who've suffered far worse than I have,
Mm.
far, far
Mm.
worse. What about them?
Yeah.
That's that's the tricky bit.
Mm. Well, it's a mystery, and I just have to go with what they've told me or what I've actually seen myself. But I get everything you've actually said. Everything you actually said to me, it can seem so unfair. But praise God when those things do seem to happen. But that's why I say in some ways it's more difficult when he appears to them when he doesn't. And I'm quite open about that. There are some Christians out there who say, "Oh yeah, if you had enough faith and all this kind of thing," but
Hmm.
that's me. God is just sovereign on occasion, I think. Yeah.
So
Can I
lament,
can I just do one more thing before we do
go
that?
for it.
Look, one thing when I looked at the Psalm again, the phrase that actually stood out for me was "Give me strength,
Hmm.
give me strength," and to me, that is what I think God promises to do, to give us strength as we do go through things.
Hmm.
What that strength looks like is not necessarily what we necessarily would like, but I do believe that He's with us in those things and He lives those things with us. Um, and He promises to be with us through good times, bad times, but also to
Hmm.
live it with us as well. And I believe that God actually does that and cares enough. So through those dreadful, dreadful times, that God is there, even if we can't see Him or feel Him at that particular time.
Hmm. That's, it's interesting, and you've made me remember one of my favourite books, When Bad Things Happen to Good People.
Oh yeah.
Written by a rabbi. Brilliant, brilliant book.
Mm,
It's not a perfect book, but it's pretty good.
mm.
It's very, very good. It was written 40 years ago now. Um, and he well, where he ends up is he doesn't believe in miracles.
Mm.
He doesn't believe in praying for healing. Um, but what he does say is the kind of prayers God answers are prayers for the strength to get through this.
Mm.
Um, I'm not saying I 100% would agree with him, but it's a really interesting. I
Mm.
appreciate his honesty. You know, he
Mm.
actually he lays his cards out and he says,
Yeah,
"This is through
yeah.
all I've been through and through all I've seen others go through. This is what I believe." So yeah, the kinds of prayer God answers is a prayer for the strength to get through what we're facing.
Mm.
That's where he'd end up too. Um, so we've talked a bit about lament, and I've read a psalm of lament, Psalm 6. And I just want to say a little bit more about lament, about crying out to God about the terrible things that happen either in our own lives or in our world, and what happens when we do that. Um, I read. I keep talking about random books I've read. I'm a bit of a magpie, Andy. I don't have many original ideas. I like to steal ideas from other people. Um,
Absolutely.
Philippa Perry, fantastic woman, psychotherapist. She's quite high profile now, and has written a book called "The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read" (brackets) "and your children will be glad you did." And It's a fabulous, fabulous book. And one of the things I found most interesting and most helpful in it, and she comes back to this idea again and again, she talks about the importance of allowing your children to feel what they feel,
Mm,
and not trying to shush them or scold them out of painful emotions. Because I guess she's thinking about how little children, their favorite cereals run out and it's the end of the world and they're in floods of tears. And I guess it can be tempting to say, oh, don't be so silly, you can have some toast or whatever. And she talks about it, how it might seem counterintuitive to say, oh, you're really upset. Oh, that's such bad luck, we've run out of cereal. Or, oh, I know you really wanted to play in that football match and you couldn't. And although it might feel like we're going to make them feel worse by saying that, actually, she says, it actually makes people feel better when
mm,
we listen to and hear and accept their emotions as they are,
mm,
and don't try to fix them,
mm,
because often we can't. Um, and yet, by allowing children, and of course it's true of adults too, it's just that she's writing about children and child development, by allowing children to feel their sadness or their anger, regardless of what we think about what's caused that sadness or that anger, allowing them to feel it and acknowledge it and name it helps them to tolerate how they're feeling. They can bear it because we've heard them.
mm,
And I guess I think about prayer of lament a little bit like that, that we cry out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's a great example that your poor friend was crying out. It's something that Jesus cried from the cross.
mm.
It's also a quotation from another psalm, I believe it's Psalm 22,
Yeah,
um,
sounds right.
another psalm of lament, crying out to God. When we cry out to God, um, our situation may not change, but I believe that God hears our pain and kind of holds our pain, and that in itself can be immensely powerful.
Mm. Do you think just talking about stuff with somebody, whether it's a friend, a therapist, use the American term counselor, or God, so you actually express yourself, actually is part on that journey to being make yourself whole again? Maybe I'm not saying it's the whole thing, but as a way of expressing it, getting it out, possibly is a good thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. But getting it out, expressing it to someone who you can trust will hear what you're saying
Mm,
and not try and tell you it's all okay. And I've actually experienced grace. I've experienced God's grace through counselors, through
mm,
therapy
mm,
myself. Not I've had various counselors over the years, who've helped me with anxiety, most of whom have not been Christians. And yet just that act of listening and helping me kind of explore what I'm feeling has immense power. And I've experienced the grace of God through that.
mm. Yeah. Often God will use people, as you say, and I've got. Well, I mean, God has used you to help me over the way. You're probably unaware of it when you said certain things. I've gone, really? How interesting. I need to mull that over or think about that.
Mm.
And I've gone away and I've thought, I've always believed certain things, and then you or others have said things. I've gone, oh yeah, there's a lot of different ways of seeing that, aren't they? Eleanor just had a quote. Do you want to read that out?
Yeah, and I love the fact that she's quoting Parks and Recreation, my number one favorite sitcom. But anyway, so she says the US Office, and then she said, "Oh,
Yeah.
actually, it's Parks and Recreation. Character is pregnant. She's uncomfortable. Her boyfriend keeps fixing everything, rubs her back, massages her feet, gets her food, and she hates it because she wants to be angry. And it takes her friends telling him to stop fixing things when he just sits down and says that sucks. But he listens rather than fixes, and that's what she needs. He
Can I just
needs."
say as a bloke here, hands up, that we do that. We want to fix stuff rather than just let. I'm being very generalistic here, aren't I? But I think that is the thing with me. I just try and fix stuff for people
Mm,
rather than just listen to them. Sometimes all I want to do is just have someone to listen. If I say I'm improving, and my son saw that, he'd go, "No, you're not, Dad. You're still just as bad as yours were at listening." Yeah, but you're my son.
mm,
It's all part of the deal with these things. But I think that's, yeah, just giving people some space and some time.
yeah.
Uh, I mean, my background is, as you know, I've done lots of coaching with people, and giving somebody an hour a week to talk, to unburden, to be challenged maybe, and just that space of that time sometimes is almost enough, because I'm not a genius, but people sometimes need just time to work some kind of stuff out can be really helpful. And doing that, of course, with God as the ultimate listener, and always has plenty of time, hasn't got to rush off. I've really got to go, and he doesn't do that.
We're pretty much out of time, Andy.
Oh, for goodness sakes, it's 9 o'clock already. Can you believe that?
Yeah, just a few things to say. We mentioned it last week, but we'll mention it again. We are planning to have a Zoom discussion at the end of Life and Soul. So 24th of February, that's a Thursday evening, 8 till 9 p.m. Because of trying to keep Zoom secure, we do need you to email us and let us know that you'd like to come so we can send you a link. Apologies, folks, but it just keeps it safe for everyone if we do it that way. So if you'd like to come along and to discuss some of the things we talked about at Life and Soul on Zoom, Thursday, 24th of February, 8 o'clock, email lifeandsoul@lrbc.org.uk and we'll send you a link. Likewise, if you want to chat to someone one-to-one about some of the things we've talked about or something that's on your mind, do email us and we can put you in touch with someone who would love to talk with you. The question for next week, is there an afterlife? And if so, what's it like? And we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you feel free to comment below or to drop us an email if you'd like, or save up for next week and pose it live. Is there an afterlife? And if so, what's it like? We're thinking about that next week. Andy, anything I've forgotten?
No, you've covered everything there, which would take me 10 minutes to waffle on about. So good job.
Okay. Well, I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Indeed. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.